Welcome to We the Waste People podcast. We're two Southern metalheads, a Gen Xer and an elder millennial, discuss the news, break down class politics, and share what it's like to be working class leftist in the heart of Dixie.
Today we'll start by picking each other's brains with another Q&A to help listeners get acquainted with our brand of leftist politics, followed by the continuation of our class discussion series. Currently, we're discussing Nancy Isenberg's book, White Trash: The 400-Year Untold History of Class in America.
And lastly, we'll end today's show with our favorite and most important segment, Lifestyles of the Looting Class, where we spotlight one absurdly rich oligarch and remind you why we can't have nice things. I'm John Brown.
And I'm ButterflyScreams.
This is We the Waste People podcast. Thanks for tuning in.
So, how have you been doing, John? Things
Pretty
going
good.
okay?
Yeah, for the most part, work is crazy hectic. It's a small shop, and I had to terminate an employee. So, but other than that, everything's great. How about yourself?
Oh, pretty good. Just same old, same old. Just been doing a lot of research for another project I'm working on. Doing a lot of podcast stuff as well. School's about to start for the kiddos, so I'm gonna be a busy bee starting next week.
So your kids
Um,
aren't back in yet.
no, well, I don't know if you remember, but I homeschool my kids.
Oh, that's right. That's right. That's right. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
so we get to do things when we want to do them, which is great.
That is awesome. You don't have to go by somebody else's schedule. You also don't have to deal with the traffic of school.
Yeah, and the kids seem to really like it. So, and
That's a positive.
I personally love having all of the control over what I'm teaching them, how I'm teaching them. I love that I get to cater to their strengths, their interests, their um just the way they do school best, and it really works for all of us. I guess let's go ahead and get started with the first part of our show.
Okay.
Um, Here we go.
As we discuss possible content for each show, we thought it might be useful to counter Epstein class narratives about people on the left by sharing our own beliefs and values in a question and answer format. After all, if you're watching mainstream media or maybe indulge in some manosphere content, they would have you think we are all Marxists who worship at the altar of DEI and trans women in sports. On the note of being a Marxist, most who make that accusation probably couldn't define what Marxism actually is, even if their life depended on it. Nevertheless, we feel it's important to counter these shallow, idiotic culture war narratives and demonstrate that we care a lot about all issues that affect the working class, particularly economic issues. As stated in our first episode, we are still getting to know one another, so this is fun for us as we journey forward into this podcast. So until further notice, we plan to make this a recurring segment, frequency to be determined. With that, Butterfly, let me pick your brain.
All
Do you have
righty,
a
let's do it.
do you have a favorite political band that's not Rage Against the Machine?
Um, when I first read that question, I was like, "Oh man," but I mean, is there really any other? I mean, come on, you know? But no, actually, yes, I do have a few. In fact, when I first read the question, this band from the early aughts came to mind, which was called Flowbots. Are you familiar with Flowbots?
Yes, but not on a very good level. I like the one song that probably anybody that has ever heard of Flowbots knows.
Right, the I Can Ride My Bike with No Handlebars.
That's the one.
Yeah, that one. Um, yeah, I could not get enough of that album back in the George W. days. And so that was a pretty important album to me during that time. Unfortunately, I didn't really care for anything that kind of came after that, so they just kind of fell off my radar. But other than that, I would definitely have to say System of a Down. I love every album they've ever made. I wish they'd make another one.
That's awesome.
Um, let's see. And as far as like other bands that are like blatantly political, it's hard for me to say. Like think of any. In fact, albums of other bands I like come to mind, and one of them being A Perfect Circle's 13th Step. And then they put out another album, I believe after that album, Emotive, I think, now that I'm thinking about it, Emotive.
Yes, you are absolutely
Yes,
right. Yes, and,
yes.
oh,
Their
good
most
lord.
recent album, which don't ask me to remember the name of that one, because I don't, but, that one was definitely political as
Eat
well.
the elephant.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Um, so yeah, those albums really stood out in my mind. And of course, my favorite band of all time, Tool's most recent album, also I think has some political flavor
Oh, absolutely.
to it. And so yeah, those were the ones that really just kind of jumped out to me upon reading that question. I'm curious, what about you? What are your favorites?
Oh, so, I mean, as far as favorites go, I mean, absolutely, A Perfect Circle is right there on the top if we're not gonna talk about Rage.
Oh, question. Wait, sorry to interrupt, but before
Nope,
we move on from Rage, I just have to ask, did you ever see them in concert?
I did not.
I did. In 2007,
That's
they
awesome.
played, like, a random show at Voodoo, I think it was Voodoo Fest in New Orleans, I just know it was in New Orleans for sure, and, I was like, "Man, there's no way I'm not going to this show." I would have freaking walked from Baton Rouge to New Orleans if I would have had to see that
Man,
show, because I just had this feeling, I was like, "This is your one and only opportunity," and so I took it and I went, and I'm so glad that I did.
that's awesome. I will say that, though it wasn't Rage, my wife and I's first concert, and concerts became a big part of our lives for a while, especially with our boys. Our first concert together and one of our first dates was, to System of a Down.
Oh, I'm jealous. Now see, I
It
have not seen System of a Down.
was a damn good show. Damn good
I
show. It was
bet.
not at a it wasn't at a huge event, like, at a huge venue or anything. It was, kind of a smaller venue in Indianapolis.
Mhm.
Great show, though, great show.
Wow, super cool.
So what, if anything, do you see MAGA having in common with the left?
Um, definitely their distrust of lobbyists and corporate money in politics. The thing is, I think the disconnect between the left and the right on that particular point, though, is that for leftists, the corruption is the logical outcome of capitalism's profit motive. So it's like a systemic problem.
Yeah,
And the right view is they see corruption as more of a moral failing of the politicians, rather than like a systemic problem. And so I think that's kind of like the two biggest differences between the two. But of course, I mean, there's so much room for, coalition building there, like that's I think if there's anything anybody's pissed off about right now with our political system, it doesn't matter where where you sit on the political spectrum, it's corruption. Now, if you want to talk about specific like policy similarities, um, I've noticed that the right wing is becoming increasingly critical of our food system, and they're not too big on like all the toxins that are in the food. And honestly, I'm with them on that because it's true. The things we allow in our food versus other parts of the planet, like it's
yeah,
kind of scary. Like, why do we
it
do
really
that? Why
is.
do we do that to ourselves? Um, and then the other thing, they're seeing like all the small farms being crushed, and I see that especially living out here in rural Tennessee. There you see a lot of people interested in farming and wanting to kind of live that lifestyle, but if you pay attention to the news, you start reading about like all these different companies that are buying up all the farmland. Some of them are like these foreign investment companies, and it's no bueno. Um,
Do you think that they see the corporate farms that are doing a lot of this though? And I get you've got foreign investment companies that are buying up a lot of land, but there's also a lot of corporate farms, and I spent a little bit of time working for one through a temp service when I lived in Illinois for a couple years. And I mean, they are a global company. They've got a shit ton of facilities around America. I won't name them, but they definitely, I would say, have a stranglehold on smaller farms.
Oh yeah, for sure. Corporate farming is definitely a problem. I'm glad you actually mentioned that. There's this guy, I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he's kind of a hero for like libertarians, especially the ones that are like in the homesteading and stuff. His name is Joel Salatin. He is this like famous, I think he's nicknamed the lunatic farmer or whatever. And his big thing is just like, he goes off about like the giant corporate farms and how it's just destroying like, the farm culture of America and things like that. So, he considers himself like a Christian or whatever. Like he really ties that to, who he is as a person. But based on what I've seen of his work, because he's participated in documentaries, books, and all kinds of stuff. Like I kind of respect the guy. Like I really admire what he's doing, even though he's definitely like what you would consider a capitalist. Like he's got that capitalist mindset, but
Right.
his issue is like um the monopolization that is the problem with corporate farming. So
But and that's oh man, there's so much more to talk about there. That is where unchecked capitalism, it allows it. You
I
know,
know it's the
when
natural
you're
conclusion.
and it's this struggle of the balance of oh, what's the word I'm looking for here? Just the rules and regulations of keeping people safe, and I know that they are like, "Oh, let's take off rules and regulations," but the problem with that is large corporations manipulate the rules and regulations or lack thereof, and they go in and they squeeze tighter and tighter. It's like an anaconda around your waist.
Right, right. Yeah, I've thought a lot about that too. Like especially with the libertarian types and their like worship of capitalism, and it's like, don't you see, like it's always going to end up in a situation where you're getting screwed. Yeah. And the other one is like their criticism of the pharma industry, big pharma, which again I can agree that there's definitely problems with that. I hate that it has led to this like fierce anti-vax movement, unfortunately. um, but if you put that part aside, I think what's really at play here is the distrust of the system, and they're right to do so, because as somebody who used to work in academia, I've seen how research can definitely be bought, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh, absolutely.
if the people conducting the research are being funded by these entities, especially like donors or private industry or something like that, like, yeah, you're going to end up in a situation where the results of your research are kind of questionable. Like, you have to wonder, okay, what was your methodology? What did your methodology look like? Is it the public good that's most important here, or is it the profit of the people funding
Absolutely.
your research? So, I completely understand the distrust I think that people have of academic institutions, the big corporate industries that are, paying for this research. And so, yeah, that's definitely somewhere where I feel like I can overlap a little with them.
Yeah, I can understand that. It's funny. I've always been a big TV junkie up until probably the last, I don't know, I don't think quite 10 years, but at least the last 5 years, I've started to move away from it. But there's this huge, I don't know when it started, but I know when I was younger, I do not remember seeing every other commercial on your favorite TV show being an ad for some new drug. Oh, and ask your doctor. Don't take if you're allergic to. Shouldn't my doctor know if I need this or not?
Right.
Shouldn't my doctor be asking me about it? But
That's such a good point.
and again, it just goes back to the pharma industry and our um, healthcare system is being so screwed up, for profit. And I'm not saying people shouldn't get paid for what they do, but when you've got an entire industry and big pharma is inside the bigger, healthcare industry that we've got in this country, when it's just strictly for profits, they're going to keep doing things that are going to make everyone distrust them in some way, shape, or form. And again,
Right.
just to add on to what you were saying, I think the miss from my standpoint as someone on the left and someone of the people that I know that are MAGA, is again, there is a distrust, rightfully so, but where the distrust is coming from or where it's, I guess, pointed to is probably the difference. Yeah.
Yeah. And just to kind of take it back to academia, because I feel like that's an area I'm most comfortable speaking on. I do want to be careful not to mischaracterize like academics, as all out there, being corrupt and not doing honest research, because that's not the case. It's not the case at all. There still are academics out there who are trying to do the right thing. It's just, here's the problem. Just the other day, like, this is an example of what the problem is. Just the other day, I read a headline about a scientist at a Louisiana university who just conducted research on Lake Pontchartrain, and that's that giant lake if you've ever seen a map of Louisiana.
Yeah.
She was studying toxic metals in the lake, and her results found that there's a ton of toxic metals in the lake. And 2 weeks after she released the results of her findings, she was fired.
Yeah,
So
that's so fucked up.
so yeah, that's I felt that was important to say, because there are people out there that are doing the right thing. It's just that at the end of the day, even academia has become corporatized, and that's just a fine example of the corporatization of academia, and that is real academics doing the right thing, getting fired because their research isn't towing some kind of industry line.
And so that may be right there could be an entire episode in the future talking
Yeah, for
about
sure.
that aspect because like you got to wonder what's driving it, because that those toxic metals in that lake are going to have some major negative impact on the American health in that area. And I'm
Oh, for
sure
sure.
that's a nationwide issue. But
Yeah.
why what's the bottom dollar, so to speak, on why she was fired? What's that chain of money that would cause them to fire her over the truth? You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Well, okay. Let me I think I can sort of answer that question a little bit. In the 16 years that I spent working in academia in Louisiana, I watched public funding for higher education be cut by 2/3 over the course of my career. So that means we were only getting 1/3 of our funding from the state, right? Public dollars. The rest, that had to come from somewhere.
Right.
That's coming from private industry. It's coming from rich donors and foundations. It's coming from people with agendas, right?
Yeah.
So that's just my take.
And we're cutting more funding from schools.
Oh, yeah. I mean, in Louisiana, especially when it came to balancing the budget every year, it was always higher education and health and human services that were the ones to be cut every single time.
Mm. That does not serve our corporate overlords if we're educated, does it?
Right. So,
Mm.
yep, that's Louisiana for you.
All right. So moving on. Why do you think MAGA is so willing to go along with anything Mango Mussolini tells them?
Okay. Well, I guess maybe this is a bit of a hot take, but I'm kind of getting the feeling that maybe there are fewer MAGA diehards than we think. And the reason I think that is because if I can just zoom out for a second and think back over the last 10 years, maybe 10 to 15 years, and look at everything that's been going on, like in the political world, we have been under a psyop that has been perpetrated not just by Russia, but the wealthy elites of this country. Um, if you think back to 2016, there were bot farms, there was the Cambridge Analytica scandal, there was I mean, Steve Bannon was even involved with the Cambridge Analytica scandal. Um, and so for me, I just feel like it's not fair to disregard like the psyop that has been waged on us as a people, right? That was intentionally done to divide us and put us in our respective corners, right?
Right.
And then you know, over that time, like, I don't know, like you started to see once Trump was in office, like you start to kind of see this mainstreaming of like white supremacy and Christian, like Christian nationalism, and all of a sudden, all these things that were once pretty taboo are suddenly becoming like normal, you know,
Yeah.
and that that's gonna do some damage to a person's brain. It's to me, it's you know, some call it a cult, some might call it radicalization. It's all the same. It all impacts the brain in the same way. And so, again, I guess this is one of the reasons that I'm not as angry with MAGA as I was at one point. Don't get me wrong, I'm still angry. I'm still very frustrated by the whole fucking thing. Like it's depressing. It's deeply depressing actually. However, I don't know, maybe I just have too big of a heart, but
No,
I
no.
just I just cannot ignore the bigger picture here and what is being done at like this macro level to just tear us apart as a country, you know? So, you know, I think that's a one reason why I feel like the number of MAGA is overstated.
Okay.
I think it's still part of the propaganda campaign. I think it's, you know, Twitter fooling us into thinking that like there's a lot more MAGA supporters out there than there really are, when in fact they're just a bunch of bots, you know? And so, but that's the power of these propaganda like psyop campaigns, you know? It can, I mean, it's a weapon of war. It really is, you
Yeah, it
know?
is. Yeah,
So,
it is. And
yeah,
that's a big part of the conversation is the war of classism in our country, right?
right, right.
So yes, it is a big weapon that the elite use against the working class. I'm just going to jump in here real quick and just add a couple
Go
of
for
little
it.
things. I wholeheartedly agree with you on so much about the having a big heart. Um, we've talked about, and I think the first episode about my dad being leaning towards MAGA, or at least outwardly appearing because of the people that he's around. But I will say there's just in the industry that I'm in, I see a lot of people who are. The previous dealership I worked at, I happened to walk by the break room as several people were on their lunch break, and they were literally like saying he should definitely get his third term because that would give him enough time to get this turned around, and then you know James Donald Bowman, I'm sorry, JD
Oh,
Vance could take it from there, and literally just on top of everything, and Pete Keg's breath, that dude, there, I tried to have a conversation with one of the techs and I was like, he brought up Pete Hegseth, and it was like, and I was just like, why do you think he's a good pick? And he's like, well, nothing else we've done has worked. And I'm like, really? And you think this is the guy? And my thought, and I heard someone else say this, and it really just brought it home to me. Somebody like that, it's the principal thought. And what they were saying is, would you trust them as a principal at your daughter's school? And if the answer is no, why would you trust them in that position?
right. Wow.
But and then the other thing I'm going to add here is, and this is where I struggle, is I always, because of my family all being MAGA, right? I have no communication with, well, no communication with either one of my brothers that I grew up with. One took his own life. The other one is MAGA with a capital MAGA. My dad is at minimum, at least in appearance, MAGA light, and my mom is probably capital MAGA as well.
Wow.
But I can't turn completely away from him because I love him. And then, I think that, as you were saying, the only way to ever make that change is to continue with kind conversation.
Right.
But the other side of that is, like I used to tell my nephew, who was dealt a pretty shitty hand growing up, at some point, you're responsible for you. You're responsible for your own actions. Yes, you've had 18 years of shit being tossed at you with, it's not even a shovel. They literally took backhoes and track hose and just started dumping shit on him, metaphorically speaking. But at some point, you're no longer in that situation. What happens from you at this point going forward is on you, and you're responsible for where your life goes now. 10 years from now, you're responsible for what your life looks like by the actions you have today. So, and that's my struggle in that. So,
I just feel for you. I can't imagine how difficult that must be because, I'm lucky enough that my family, for the most part, they are not MAGA. I don't have a single family member that I can think of that is, even MAGA light. So I can't imagine how hard that must be. I know it's easy for me to say, oh, we've got to be kind to these people. We've got to be the better person, or you know, um, we have to be better. Or as
yeah.
Melania would say, we have to be best, right? But so like I recognize that, I am in a very like privileged position, even though I'm beginning to hate that word privilege. I am in a privileged position where I don't have to deal with the high blood pressure of, having to have a conversation with someone I love who is also a MAGA person. Like
Yeah.
I just want you to know that I feel for you, and I'm if you ever need to talk or like
I
I'm here. Um
appreciate that.
but no, like honestly, a lot of where I'm coming from too is just the fact that cult specialists, radicalization experts, they would also tell you the only way you're going to ever change these people is not by screaming facts at them. It's by planting seeds. It's by being
Absolutely.
open. It's by
Yeah.
listening. It's by, genuinely caring why they feel the way they feel. You know what I mean? And
Yep.
so that's the position that I come from on it. But again, I don't deal with that in my everyday. I don't. I just don't have any MAGA people in my life.
Yeah.
So
And again, you're spot on with so much of this, the psyop. Um it's all being thrown at us in a way to manipulate. Um, but you're also right that we have to. It does require empathy, and it does require active listening. Otherwise, we are just building a thicker, bigger wall between ourselves. And they planted their tree, and either we're going to feed it and water it and provide it oxygen to grow into a really thick tree between us, or we're going to plant a different seed and allow that one to grow.
right, exactly. And that's why I sent you that video the other day of who, and just
Uh-huh.
how the video just like rubbed me all the wrong ways. To me, it's just furthering the problem. It's not making anything better.
Yeah,
So
I'm for the most part right there with you on that. I get the things he was saying. Again, that's where that's you. I wholeheartedly believe that two things can be true at the same time, right?
Oh, yeah,
Yes,
for
we
sure.
we definitely need to change the conversation. We definitely need to remain empathetic and continue to try to reach across and save space for them and hold space for them. But they also are responsible for themselves and for their opinions. We all are. There's while I don't think that they're a majority of this country, I the rest of the country didn't follow in and didn't jump to it. And why? What was the difference between those who did follow and continue to follow, and those of us that didn't? And I disagree with the narrative that it's education, those who are educated, because again, I didn't do anything outside of high school, and I barely did high school. I was at best a George W. Bush of high school. I was a C student,
Yeah.
of throughout after elementary school. I was pretty damn decent student in elementary, but after that, I became a subpar student at best. So, but we've said before, on paper, I should be a Trump supporter right there, um, but I'm not. I'm the opposite.
You say that, but I think that's the case for Trump 1.0, but I think Trump 2.0 and the voting demographics show that he definitely broke into some demographics that just aren't what you would think, right? And
Yeah,
so I find
definitely.
that incredibly interesting, especially when I think about, some of our lefty friends who, stay enraged about everything that's going on and want to call it racism and all these other things. And
Yeah.
it's like, I hate to tell you, brother, but a lot of these same people that voted for Trump, and I'm talking about, the brown folks, the black folks, the women folk, all these people that voted for Trump this time around are the same ones that voted for Obama. So I'm sorry, I don't buy the race argument. I just don't buy it.
That's a
I'm
bigger,
not
broader that's a
I'm not
big conversation, and I'm not saying that there's not any of that. I think that's a conversation for a later time. I know from my family that that is a major part of it. My
yeah.
mom and my brother that is still alive, race is a major part of it for them. But
Yeah.
I get and agree with you that there were a lot of black people, there were a lot of Latino people that and, Haitian people, Cuban people that voted for him because, again, they didn't think that it was going to impact them, and then it started to impact them.
Yeah. And let me state for the record, I do acknowledge that race is a part of it.
Yeah.
But very specifically, I guess I have a person in mind, the creator of the video I shared with you.
Yep.
He talks a lot about the race, race, race. Everything is racism. Everything is racism. And yes, that's true to a degree. But I'm sorry, I am not going to I do not buy that Trump won the second time around because people are racist.
I
Just the facts don't hold up to it.
I would say it was still a larger part of it, but I would also say that misogyny was a bigger part of it, people not willing to vote for a woman. I mean, you took a white man versus a white man and, Biden won.
Yeah.
Trump has not won against a white man. But he beat a white woman and then he beat a woman who is brown. So, and again, that's definitely a larger conversation for another time.
Sure. We'll definitely have to come back to that because, I think, again, we're kind of leaving out the class element,
Yeah.
which is kind of ironic given what we're setting out to do here. But anyway, um, yeah. So we should probably jump to the next question then, so that we don't spend all of our time on that one.
Well,
Because
and
Lord knows we could keep going.
you ain't kidding. So, in episode 1, you had mentioned that you now hold some conservative ideas. Can and would you elaborate on that?
Yes, and I'll do my very best. Because it's for me, a lot of this kind of starts to venture into some very philosophical areas of how I've come to this position. And I'm probably gonna blah 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 and maybe even lose you a little bit, but I'll do my best. Okay, so traditionally, leftists, they're known for like, oh, they're for big government and, right wingers or small government. And, with that in mind, I've come to, and again, probably because I'm very interested in a lot of like anarchist principles, I've come to be sold on the idea of like local politics being far more important and impactful than national politics. Um, I would, know what? I'm gonna save that thought for later. So just, just so local versus national. I definitely think a smaller government, like more localized situation. I think I'm pretty much sold on that. Um, let's see, and the reason is because it's easier to pressure your politicians because they are geographically like they can't run and hide from you. They're not as exposed to um the millions of dollars that the lobbyists are like waving in front of their face all the time up in DC. You can just hold your local politicians more accountable than you ever could your federal politicians. um so as you can see from my notes here that I really go in on this. So I'm just going to I'm going to keep it surface level. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so moving on to the Second Amendment, I am now um, pro Second Amendment. I've always historically been pretty torn on the issue because I've always had some libertarian streaks as far as my politics go. But unfortunately, every time there's a mass shooting, I then think, oh, maybe we should do something about these guns, But I've read some really good like anarchist arguments for the Second Amendment,
Yeah.
and those kind of put me over the edge of being pro Second Amendment. I think that um a lot of the gun violence, enough isn't spoken about the environmental causes, and that can be like the income inequality, the marginalization of certain groups of people,
Yeah.
and all the factors that go into that, right? And so I feel like it's one of those like it's like a systemic thing that we need to address first
Mind if I jump
because
in?
yes, go for it.
So, completely agree with you on all this. I think that the thing a lot of people miss is it goes back to the unchecked capitalism. So, I grew up with guns in the house. My dad was a hunter, has always been a hunter. Um, there's always been I've always been around firearms. I've never been anti-gun or anti-2A. Um, the issue for me with it is that, and let's just leave it at a political level in regards to politicians. The ones who are simply thoughts and prayers are thoughts and prayers because of the money. Um, if you take the NRA alone, right, and this is coming from my 12 years as a pawnbroker, I saw how it just a secondhand look of how things worked. The NRA itself doesn't really give a shit about people's gun rights, in my opinion. They are strictly a marketing platform for the firearm industry as in a capitalism aspect. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Oh yeah. Yeah, totally.
And that's their big thing. Again, I don't think that there should be at any time doing away with the Second Amendment as a whole. But I do think that there are some things that could be tweaked, some things we could do to keep our kids safe in schools and not have the mass shootings that we have. I mean, we had one dude on a plane who tried to have a bomb in his shoes, and now you have to take your shoes off and have had to take your shoes off at the airport for 20 plus years now. And
Yeah,
for the rest of our lives, I guess,
so
going
stupid.
forward.
Yeah.
we if it's outside of our country, if it's one of the others, we're going to find a way to regulate everything around it. But when it comes from inside our country, when it's that 2A, and again, this is strictly from a unchecked capitalism aspect, we're not touching it, and it's not again, it's not got anything to do with the Second Amendment. It is strictly from a capitalism standpoint is the reason they won't touch it.
Amen. Yeah, I mean, that's so true. So another thing that I feel like I overlap a little bit with conservatives on now is like regulations, especially around like starting small businesses and stuff. Oh my God, the way that things are right now, like entry into the market for just any little old person like myself who wants to just, maybe start like a little restaurant like in her farmhouse. There's just so many rules and things that I just can't afford to deal with, right? To even get started.
Yeah.
And I think the big irony about this particular one is that one of Kamala's small business plans was to offer, I think, like $50,000 in
Yep.
subsidies, or no, a tax deduction for small businesses to get started. That could have been all that I needed to start my business. Not that I think she would have ever actually pursued it or that it would have ever passed, but it's worth noting that Kamala had at least paid some lip service to helping out small business owners.
Right.
Um, Another thing, um, and I feel like this is one that maybe we could, spend some more time on at a later date, but I guess you could class it under family values. One of the things that really bugs me is just like how we as a culture and society, we don't live among our family anymore. Like we're so spread out. And then worst of all, we put our elderly in like these nursing homes where they're most likely going to be abused or neglected and all these horrific things. And we don't even bat an eye at the thought. Like it's almost as if we've done that for time immemorial. We don't even think about it. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
And that disturbs me. It just disturbs me. And so let's see what else. So I have some issues with with some of the, I guess you could say, unintended consequences of second wave feminism, and one of them being that um, I never really had a choice on whether or not I could like work or be a stay at home mom. Like I just grew up knowing that I was going to go to work and I was going to be, if I wanted to have kids, I was going to also work, I was
Right.
going to do double duty. Right. And it wasn't until I was like, 5 to 10 years into being a parent before I suddenly realized, like, wait a minute. I thought I was this like liberated woman now, and I was supposed to love working and I was supposed to love being a mom at the same time. I was supposed to love everything about this. But the reality is like, yes, I love my job. Yes, I love my child, but that's a lot of work. It is so much work,
Yeah.
right? And
Absolutely.
so I I just, if I could go back in time and if capitalism were a thing, 'cause make no mistake about it, the issue here is capitalism, not anything else. People who might be listening to this, it's capitalism. Okay. Um, I'm very glad that women, are freed from the home. But what I would like to see is motherhood being embraced more by the left. I feel like culturally on the left, if you really embrace motherhood, that's like what you want for yourself and for your life, it's not, it's kind of frowned upon. Like you're just kind of looked at like, oh, really? Okay. I don't understand that. I wish we could. Anyway, again, this is something we could spend a lot more time on.
Yeah, definitely a whole nother episode on its own. Because my wife and I have had a similar conversation regarding that.
Yeah.
And it's, we saw it as a need for the extra income. When we look back at it, we didn't actually make that much more in by the time you figure in gas, by the time you figure in daycare, um, and all the other expenses that go into working and raising kids. It's you're by the time you're done, you're not really bringing that much more money into the household. So yeah, that's definitely a opportunity for a bigger conversation.
Yeah, and it's one I would love to have, and I really hope we do in the future because this is something that I don't think is talked about enough on the left. And if it is, well, I don't know where I've been because I haven't heard it.
Yeah, I definitely don't
Um,
think there's a big conversation out there about it. All right, and moving on to class discussion. For this week's class discussion, we're continuing on with chapter 6 through 8 of Nancy Isenberg's book, White Trash: The 400-Year Untold History of Class in America. We are going to change it up a little bit this time. Instead of reading excerpts in detail like we have from each chapter, we're going to summarize, but there will be a bigger focus on chapter 8 since it covers the eugenics movement of the early 1900s. Given that Trump's regime's constant use of eugenics language, we must give the topic the attention it deserves. Before we get to that, just a reminder that last week we left off with Andrew Jackson's cracker politics. He demonstrated that there was a largely unseen voter base capable of shaking up the political establishment, the liberty loving backwoodsman brawler type. Today, we move into the Civil War era where class and identity politics continue to be shaped by the ruling elite.
so chapter 6 is called Pedigree and Poor White Trash: Bad Blood, Half-Breeds, and Clay Eaters. The regional conflict that culminated in the Civil War reshaped ideas of class and identity, especially in the South. Poor whites, once labeled squatters or crackers, were increasingly stigmatized as sandhillers, clay eaters, and most enduringly, poor white trash. They were depicted not only as lazy and degraded, but as biologically defective, a degenerate race marked by inbreeding, alcoholism, and even abnormal physical traits. Writers and intellectuals such as Daniel Hunley argued that poverty stemmed from bad bloodlines rather than slavery, reinforcing the belief that class was inherited. This view was widely accepted across the political spectrum. Even Harriet Beecher Stowe, despite her opposition to slavery, portrayed poor whites as a dangerous, immoral underclass in her second novel, called Dread: A Tale of the Great Dismal Swamp.
By the mid 19th century, poor whites were seen as permanent outcasts of Southern society, excluded from political power by planter dominated courts and property requirements. They were socially ostracized and consigned to the worst lands, often forced into subsistence squatting or menial labor alongside enslaved people. Their poverty was used to defend slavery itself, as Southern elites argued that class subordination was natural and necessary, with intellectual Caucasians destined to rule over both Black people and inferior whites. Despite migration westward, poor whites remained a constant class, regarded more as specimens of degeneration than as citizens. Thus, the squatter was reimagined as white trash, a symbol of biological and social inferiority on the margins of the slaveholding order.
Before we read on to chapter 7, did you have any comments on that particular summary? I feel like it's pretty much uh, in line with everything we've learned so far.
Yeah,
I,
definitely. If I was going to say anything, for those who have not read the book and plan to either read or listen, um, from my standpoint, I feel like even though classism as a tool was there from the beginning, I feel like the Civil War era is really where it started to get defined, and racism in this country was really came to a forefront. And it was racism as a tool. Again, personally, I don't believe in race. It's a construct, but racism is a tool that the elites have used, and I feel like that the Civil War is when the elites, especially the planter class of the South, figured out how to use that to manipulate um, poor whites into hating people who weren't white.
yeah, they needed soldiers after all.
That's right, and protection.
Okay, well then, Yeah, I pretty much agree with that. So I think we'll move on to chapter 7. Chapter 7 is called Cowards, Poltroons, and Mudsills Civil War as Class Warfare. During the Civil War, Confederate elites framed the conflict as class warfare, redefining it as a struggle between Southern aristocracy and Northern mudsills. Pro slavery leaders like Jefferson Davis and James Henry Hammond claimed slavery elevated poor whites above black people, while Northern free labor condemned them to servitude and unrest. They painted the Union as a degenerate society of greasy mechanics, immigrant laborers, and insolent freedmen, contrasting it with a supposedly stable South where class divisions were determined by race rather than wealth. Secessionists even warned that, quote, black Republicans were really, quote, red Republicans seeking not just emancipation, but a dangerous social revolution that threatened the planter class itself.
At the same time, Southern intellectuals openly defended rule by patrician stock while casting suspicion on their own poor white population. Non slaveholders were alternately courted and repressed, promised land, wages, and upward mobility through slave ownership, but also intimidated by vigilante groups when their loyalty wavered. Confederate propagandists argued that even the poorest whites would defend slavery to avoid sinking to the level of black laborers. Yet beneath this rhetoric lay deep anxiety. Defeat at the hands of the northern mudsills or betrayal by homegrown white trash threatened to undo the planter aristocracy. In this framing, the Civil War was not just a battle over slavery, but a fight to preserve the social dominance of the Southern elite against both Northern egalitarianism and the potential rebellion of their own poor.
Yeah, that pretty much underscores everything we just said, particularly that last line about potential rebellion of their own poor.
Right?
Yeah, definitely don't want the poor white trash rising up and realizing that, they've got more in common with their, you know,
Enslaved
black
brethren?
neighbors. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, could you imagine? Man, if only, if only. Anyway, um, all right. Well, okay. So let's move on to chapter 8. And this is where we're going to get knee deep into some eugenics. Chapter 8 is called Thoroughbreds and Scalawags, Bloodlines and Bastard Stock in the Age of Eugenics. All right. The text traces how ideas of Darwinism, eugenics, race, and class shaped debates during and after Reconstruction. W.E.B. Du Bois argued in 1909 that social Darwinism thrived in the U.S. because it reinforced existing racist hierarchies. Eugenics, promoted by Darwin's followers and echoed by Jefferson, used animal breeding analogies to justify class and racial inequalities, presenting them as natural and scientific. After the Civil War, Reconstruction politics became a struggle between poor whites, freed black people, and the old planter elite. President Andrew Johnson briefly envisioned empowering poor whites as a new middle class while keeping elites weakened and freed people marginalized. But this vision collapsed. The Freedmen's Bureau initially aided both groups, often providing more relief to impoverished whites, yet public discourse increasingly cast poor whites as an evolutionary, quote, dangerous class, degenerates threatening society, while portraying black freedmen as hardworking and capable. Republicans often attacked poor whites as socially and biologically inferior, while Democrats clung to the defense of a, quote, white man's government, warning of, quote, mongrel racial mixing and vilifying carpetbaggers and scalawags. By the end of Reconstruction, elites regained power and poor whites were reframed in more positive terms as redeemable farmers and mountaineers rather than permanent social burdens. Any thoughts, John?
No, not at the moment. I'm gonna yeah.
Yeah.
I think I'm just gonna
Yeah.
keep them to myself for the moment.
Okay. I One thing I took away from reading this part of the chapter was some information about the Freedmen's Bureau that I did not know a thing about beforehand.
Uh-huh.
I'd heard of the Freedmen's Bureau, and I honestly didn't know anything more than that. I assumed based on the name that it was, some sort of agency or office established to help, newly freed slaves get on their feet, but that's all that I knew about it. So then to find out that it not only served like freed, former slaves, but also like poor white people, I was like, wow, that's really cool and so interesting. I had no idea about that.
Yeah, and I didn't know a lot either, other than from a few podcasts. There's one, and it's slipping my mind, but it's a reenactment of the Johnson presidency. Basically, it picks up literally with Lincoln's assassination and goes through Grant's presidency. It's a 2-season podcast. Um, and they mentioned the Freedmen's Bureau a few times, but even in that, it only is mentioned as a bureau, as you said, helping freed black enslaved people. It doesn't talk about helping white people at all in that. So again, it's manipulated, and I don't believe that the podcast itself intentionally manipulated the information, but it's manipulated information that we've been handed, right? Because if you want to keep us separate based on anything and everything you can, and race being one of those big things, if you are trying to make people think that the black people are the ones who have always been given a handout, um, then you don't talk about the fact that the Freedmen's Bureau helped a lot of poor white people. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, like so interesting that they left that out. I mean, it's just, pretty important detail, don't you think? Um But no, like anyone who's listening to this, gosh, I cannot recommend enough that you read this book. The author spends a good amount of time talking about the Freedmen's Bureau and goes into much more detail about just how much help poor whites received
Yeah.
alongside the former slaves. And it's just such important information, and everyone should know about it. So please, 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 definitely check that out. So. John, did you want to read these last 3 paragraphs?
Yeah, I got it. I got it. So Theodore Roosevelt, who became president in 1901, embraced eugenics thinking and the strenuous life, believing that modern softness could be cured by wilderness, war, and prolific breeding. He promoted large Anglo American families to prevent race suicide and saw childbirth as women's patriotic duty. It's your God given duty. Sorry. Roosevelt supported federal control over marriage and divorce, aligning with eugenicists who argued that individuals had no right to marry or reproduce independently of society's needs. During the 20th century, eugenics became a national movement backed by elites, scientists, and reformers. It manifested in Better Baby and Fitter Family Contest, educational campaigns, marriage restrictions, and state sterilization laws. By 1931, 27 states had sterilization statutes targeting the unfit, a broad category that included the poor, disabled, and especially poor white women who were portrayed as sexually dangerous, irresponsible, and socially disruptive. Reformers often deemed sterilization cheaper than institutionalization. Eugenists drew heavily on animal breeding analogies supported by wealthy donors and breeders, framing human heredity as a matter of stock improvement. Women, particularly educated middle class women, were cast as gatekeepers of eugenic marriages, while poor white women were vilified as the greatest threat to the nation's health. The rural South was singled out as a center of degeneracy, plagued by disease, illiteracy, and worthless poor whites. By the early 20th century, the so called race problem had shifted focus. No longer centered on Black Americans, it targeted poor whites as the new crisis for American society.
Thoughts on that?
Man, just the parallels with what's going on currently in the administration. And I haven't heard anything recently, but I know that there was talks of creating different lists, those who were autistic, those who were LGBTQIA, and I know that there were a few other lists that they were looking to keep. And again, I know that most people's minds go back to Nazi Germany, uh, but the fact that it was so prevalent during the early 1900s is just really mind-boggling to me. I know that a lot of historians talk about, some of their favorite presidents, and one of the big ones that come up for a lot of people is Theodore Roosevelt. But this is often left out in their conversations. And until reading this book, I did not realize just how many presidents in our history believed in eugenics.
Right. Oh, so much to say about that. Okay, first thing is, this chapter got me thinking, when did I first hear of eugenics? And I remember, like you said, in the context of World War II. Um, and I remember thinking for the longest time that eugenics was brought to the world by Nazi Germany, right? And
Yep.
it wasn't until later that I happened to just learn more about it on my own, just seeking out the information. And I'll be damned if the reality is that the Nazis got it from us.
Right?
Like okay, Hitler was inspired by our eugenic scientists, right? And I was just like, wow. I mean,
How
I don't know why I was shocked. I mean, honestly, given like our history, like around like race and just like,
yeah.
this notion of like, different social groups being better than others and all that stuff, like it should not have been as much of a shock as it was, but it was. Um, and then also, my undergraduate degree is in anthropology, right? And just for people who don't know, anthropology is basically the study of human beings, right? And there's different fields of it, like cultural, biological, archaeological, and linguistic, right? And not even in my biological anthropology classes did I ever hear about eugenics. Like,
Really?
no, no. I spent a lot of time the other night as I was preparing our script thinking back, and I was like, surely they brought it up, and honestly, I do not recall it ever coming up. And so then I got to thinking, well, I wonder why that is. Is it because it's such garbage science it's not worth mentioning? Or was it like a stain that, they're just embarrassed about? You know what I mean? Because,
Yeah.
and this takes me to my next point. This is probably the hardest pill to swallow of it all, and that is that these eugenics folks were the progressives of their day.
Holy shit.
Yes. And as a result, like I struggle now to consider myself a progressive. And this kind of like dovetails into what we were just talking about, how I told you like I'm coming to this realization that there's like a left elite class, right?
Yeah.
And these are those people, right? These are like the progressives of the early 1900s were like the leading scientists, the leading academics, the intelligentsia, if you will, right? And like it, like today, like even talking about Bernie Sanders, like one of the ways that we separate ourselves from liberals, right? The centrists, is to call ourselves progressives because we're further left. And I just feel like that is just, I just, I have an issue with that. It's not correct. It's not correct at all. When I think back on the history of progressivism in this country, like I don't want to be associated with that,
Yeah,
and I bet most progressives
mm,
today have no clue that there's like a through line there.
yeah, they probably don't. Again, I didn't. And as a whole, I think progressivism is a good thing. That part of it is pretty damn horrific. Um, and I part of me makes me think of, I've heard people talk about separating the art from the artist. And I think this might be one of those times. And I know it's not, it doesn't exactly line up, right? Like I don't know whether Michael Jackson ever did the things he was accused of. I'm not okay if he did do those things, but I still like his music. And that's, me being a metalhead to say,
Yeah.
yeah, I still jam some Michael Jackson from time to time.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and and there, that's just the easiest example that comes to mind. There are so many other examples.
Yeah.
We could talk about so many people in the Epstein class and that are on
Yeah.
the Epstein list, but
No, you
yeah,
make
no,
a
I
fair
get that.
point. You make a
I
fair point. It's
But it
just
is
for
ugly.
me. Yeah, I think my autistic literal brain just I can't like I hear that word progressive and I'm just like eugenics like
But
you
again, I
know
think the bigger question there is why did it? You know, you said that Hitler got it from us, our scientists, and until I read this book, I didn't know that. I didn't
really
know how big of a deal. Well, hell, I didn't even know that Darwin was the one that came up with eugenics, or was
actually
it Darwin's brother? Right,
it was Darwin's cousin
cousin. Okay, okay,
Galton or something like that.
yeah, but Darwin
Um
believed in it himself, didn't he?
yeah, he definitely subscribed to it. But again, I mean, that's your elite
Man.
scientific leftist like they anyway, I don't want to belabor the point, but yeah, it's disappointing as hell. It's really disappointing and I am so glad that you know, we've well, I was about to say I'm so glad we've moved on from it and then I looked at my notes and saw actually the tech industry.
Right?
Yeah.
And if people aren't paying attention, and I'll be honest, I was not paying attention until, on that chat group that we're both a part of, I started seeing people talk about that a lot. And I was like, seriously? This is making a comeback? But not only is it making a comeback, it's been basically, it had made a comeback just quietly. And, again, those tech bros that are really driving it have been doing so for longer than the last year.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, especially when you start digging into the people affiliated with these tech bros, like Curtis Yarvin, their philosopher king guy, like that guy. Yeah, he's
Yeah.
been writing this shit for a while. You know what? Peter Thiel has too with his sovereign individual crap. Like, anyway,
Yeah, because
um,
I'll be honest, going into during the campaign season last year, I kept hearing them talk, JD Vance especially is who comes to mind, but talking about the concern about population decline. And all I can think of is I've been paying attention for so long to about how quickly we're approaching 50 billion people on Earth. It took up until the year 2000 to reach that first billion people alive on this Earth. And then the projection was from the year 2000 to the year 2050, we reached 50 billion people. That's a
my God.
huge, massive, expansive population in 50 years when you look at how long it took to get to the first billion. And I just was scratching my damn head about why are they so concerned about the growth of population? We're going to be at 50 billion in another 25 years. But now I understand. I
They,
understand why.
they mean white people.
Yeah, well, not only that, they mean the elite white people.
Oh yeah, yeah. Um, And if you listen closely to Donald Trump and JD Vance, notice that they talk nonstop about good genes,
Yeah,
IQ, and birth rates.
yeah.
Those are all super duper eugenics type
And it and if
language.
anyone believes that fucking Donald Trump has a high IQ, I got some damn land for you to sell.
Oh my God. Yeah. And you know what? I even have issue with the use of IQ as any sort of metric. There's actually been studies that show like what garbage IQ tests actually are.
Really?
Yes, yes. And in fact, um, it's kind of personal to me because like, I'm a late diagnosed autistic person.
Uh-huh.
And so this talk of like IQ, like that's kind of a trigger for us folks because it's been used against, neurodivergent people in pretty insidious ways. Um But anyway, that's a conversation for another day. There's just so much when it comes to these tech bros, man. They're all about like this eugenic like stuff where they're worried about expanding their lives and they want to live forever and um basically make sure that the world is only populated with quote good genes, people with
You
good genes.
you know what blows me away is in my and again, I am just now starting to wake up to all this, but one of the things that I have recently learned is how the theocrats are okay with the technocrats, even though there's a lot, and not only are they okay, they're like really working together to manipulate society. And one of the things I was just sitting here thinking about while you were talking about those, all this was that they are literally talking about manipulating humanity to get a specific breed of people. Yet theologists have always said you can't do God's work. You can't manipulate what God wants, right? And the reason I think about that is like there, back when there was a big discussion of using embryonic cells in science to cure different things here and there. But yet we're okay if we're breeding a higher class of people. Isn't it ultimately the same thing?
Yeah, like it's a very strange situation watching these two groups of people with what seem like totally opposing worldviews. Like they're somehow making it work, man, and they're coming together and um yeah, it's quite scary the world that these two groups want to take us into.
It's
Um
it's maddening.
yeah. So, okay, well, I think that's it for our class discussion. Did you have any last thoughts before we move on to our last segment?
No, man, I mean, there's a lot that we could sit here and just go on about, but we've got time for that.
Yeah, I
Um,
agree. When it comes to the tech bros, I could literally spend hours and hours and hours talking about them.
yeah. So, lifestyles of the looting class, why we can't have nice things segment. Today's oligarch and Scooby Doo villain, Stephen Schwarzman, CEO of Blackstone. Now, it wasn't until recently that I had really heard about Blackstone, and in doing research for this week's villain, just really blew me away. So, in the Forbes list of wealthiest people, and I've said in the other episodes, Forbes does a yearly list, and apparently recently they decided to take it to a daily tracker for the winners and losers. They literally track the people who had the biggest gains in their wealth and the people who had the biggest losses. So on the Forbes list of wealthiest people, Mr. Schwartzman is 30th on Forbes real-time list of 200 wealthiest worth 52 billion. And that's as of August 26th of this year, 2025, out of 200 billionaires. He is down from number 24 in 2024.
Oh,
He's a
tough break.
right. He lost 6 places on that list. I'm sure he's devastated.
I bet. Mhm.
The son of a dry goods store owner, Stephen Schwarzman founded private equity firm Blackstone with fellow billionaire Peter Peterson in 1985. His full name is Stephen Allen Schwarzman. He was listed as having a salary. For the year, his salary is 60 million. His net
Ugh.
worth at the time of the article that I got this information from was 35 billion. Is associated with Blackstone Group, which we're going to talk a little bit more in a moment. He is a Republican. He celebrated his 60th and 70th birthdays by spending millions of dollars on parties. And during the drought in 2011, Stephen was listed as one of the top 5 water consumers. He had used 7,409,688 gallons of water within a space of 1 year. So, from an October 6, 2022 article from Housing as a Human Right, while millions of renters struggle to make ends meet, corporate landlord Stephen Schwarzman, whose company spent mountains of cash to successfully kill rent control ballot measures in California, has bought another multi-million dollar mansion, according to a news report. Schwarzman already owns posh homes in New York, Palm Beach, St. Tropez, and Jamaica. One of the richest people on earth, Schwarzman has made his fortune by carrying out predatory business practices that fueled the global housing affordability crisis, United Nations housing experts have said. Schwarzman, a staunch foe of rent control, is the co-founder of Blackstone Group, one of the world's largest corporate landlords. CEO World recently estimated Schwarzman's net worth to be around 29 billion. And again, that was back in like 2017, 2018. In 2018 and 2020, Blackstone shelled out millions in campaign contributions to defeat California ballot measures that would have repealed or reformed statewide rent control restrictions. For the 2020 campaign, Housing as a Human Right caught Schwarzman and Blackstone trying to dodge public scrutiny by using a shell committee to funnel millions to no on Prop 21. So again, this guy has multiple properties worth millions of dollars, and he's fighting against rent control so that you and I are spending every extra penny we have just to have a house over our head.
I hate these people so much.
In August of 2010, Schwarzman compared the Obama administration's plan to raise the tax rate on carried interest to a war and Hitler's invasion of Poland in 1939, stating it's a war. It's like when Hitler invaded Poland in 1939.
Oh my God, these people.
Yeah. Schwarzman later apologized for the analogy. In 2012, Obama called Schwarzman and requested his assistance in brokering a budget agreement with Republicans in Congress to avoid a fiscal cliff. Eventually, a deal was brokered with Schwarzman's help. The new tax plan added 1 trillion of additional revenue by raising taxes, closing tax loopholes, and ending deductions. Obama later drafted a formal message of support for Schwarzman scholars, an education initiative undertaken by Schwarzman. Raising taxes on the wealthy does help. He is a longtime friend of President Donald Trump and provides outside counsel and served as chair of Trump's Strategic and Policy Forum. In response to criticism of his involvement with the Trump administration, Schwarzman penned a letter to current Schwarzman scholars arguing that having influence and providing sound advice is a good thing, even if it attracts criticism or requires some sacrifice. An interesting note, in September 2011, Schwarzman was listed as a member of the International Advisory Board of the Russian Direct Investment Fund. Russia, Russia, Russia.
I'm telling you, man, we should probably learn Russian ASAP.
Right? A new analysis from Private Equity Stakeholder Project reveals that at minimum, private equity firms, so this is where we're getting more into his company that he founded, Blackstone and companies like it. But private equity firms own 8,200 apartment buildings and over 2.2 million units in the U.S., representing about 10% of all apartments in the country. Released in conjunction with the Alliance of Californians for Community Empowerment, the North Carolina Tenants Union, and the Community Economic Defense Project, the Private Equity Multifamily Housing Tracker presents the most in-depth analysis of the state of private equity buyouts and apartment housing to date. More than half, 55% of total units currently owned by private equity companies are in just 5 states: Texas, Florida, California, Georgia, and North Carolina. And almost two-thirds, 62%, of the total units currently owned were acquired by private equity companies just since 2018. Across the country, tenants of private equity owned properties have reported problems such as large rent increases, hidden fees, poor maintenance and repairs, lack of responsiveness to tenant concerns, and aggressive eviction practices.
Yeah, to me, I'm sorry to
No,
interrupt.
you're fine. Please
I just
do.
have to say, I just feel like this issue could be such a slam dunk issue for uh Democratic politicians. Like start a platform of, banning private equity from buying up real estate. Like, why have they not seized on that? Oh, that's right. Because they're bought and paid
That's
for.
right. Yeah, I was sitting here thinking the same thing. I won't say that every one of them, because not all, but the majority, especially those DNC Democrats,
Yes,
are
yes.
just as corrupt as the RNC Republicans and MAGA, right? They all are getting freaking paid. North Carolinians are facing a dire housing affordability crisis. Private equity's ownership of 1 in 5 apartments in North Carolina and their recent rapid acquisitions highlight the need for strong tenant protections. Right now, predatory private equity landlords can take advantage of North Carolinians' lack of tenant protections to dramatically raise rents, charge exorbitant fees, and evict tenants without cause. North Carolina tenant laws must be strengthened so North Carolinians have control over their housing and their own lives. And I'm going to stop right there because again, there is so much that
Yeah.
I wanted to add a lot, but I think for the sake of time, I'm going to skip the rest of it. But, ultimately what I was trying to do is show where that unchecked capitalism, again, they are able to buy not one, not two, not three. He's got 5 that I could find listed, multi-million dollar mansions, right? But the average American is struggling to pay rent. And they're struggling to pay rent in apartment complexes and houses whose landlords, being these investment companies, aren't doing shit to take care of the properties.
I know. There's got to come a point where, like, people are just going to get enough. They're going to get enough, and I don't understand how these. Oh, that's right. They're building bunkers. That's how they're preparing. That's right. Oh, and for the record, let me just go back and state the absurd water cannons and what was the other? Oh, the lake of fire. That
Yeah.
was totally true.
Oh my god. When we were talking about that, I'm sure they figured it out, but I just imagine like when they set that lake ring on fire that it goes up so high it just sucks all the air out of the center of the lake and they all suffocate and die.
That would be awesome. Yeah, we can only hope and pray, right?
That's right. Well, folks, we appreciate you joining us. That's all we have for today. We hope you're learning something and, most importantly, realizing just how much the Epstein class hates us all. As a reminder, all the sources we use to compile the information discussed in this episode will be linked to in the show notes, so please check them out. Join us in 2 weeks as we continue to explore class in America and call out the oligarchs destroying our country. Currently, you can find us on Spotify, YouTube, and Substack by searching at Waste People Pod.
And I'll add that we are now on Blue Sky and TikTok. So please find us on there, give us a like, share the stuff that we post, and help get us out there. We'd really, really, really appreciate it because we really enjoy doing this and we want to keep doing it. So, alrighty. Well, see everybody in 2 weeks.
Bye, y'all.